Hello everyone and welcome to the 0.9 update of Reentry. In this video I'll briefly cover some of the main updates that the 0.9 update will introduce, and then I'll go through a couple of demos before ending the session with a brief talk about what's ahead in terms of 0.9 and what's the plan for 1.0. So yeah, the main features of 0.9 is that I've been working on redefining and restructuring the entire user interface of the game. There's quite a lot of different elements and moving parts involved here. So one of the bigger pain points that some of you have been having is that if you're running re-entry on, a screen resolution which is ultra wide, or a very small one which is less than HD, for example 1080, then you might have seen that the UI doesn't really scale very well, and some elements become unreachable, and other ones overlap each other, things like that. So this adaptive UI feature has now been going through most of the elements in the UI to make sure that they are adapting accordingly. So if you're playing the game on ultra wide, for example, you should be able to reach most of the user interface elements. One of the visual changes that you will see in terms of this is that most of the menus are now in single column and are all in this scrollable panel. Before, this was split into two different panels, and you have to, go back and forth between one to find a setting. Now everything is one neat column, and it's a little bit easier to find the setting that you're looking for. Same applies for realism. You can see that everything here is now in one column that should scale well on all screen resolutions. Another feature that I've introduced is text-to-speech. The text-to-speech feature will automatically read out all of the mission messages. So if you're running an Academy tutorial, there will be a voice that is generated based on the text in the mission command box. So text-to-speech, if I enable that one, you will be able to hear that. I'll quickly go through a demo on that pretty soon. But before diving into the demo, I just briefly want to mention languages. So another big feature of 0.9 is that all of these text elements on the user interface have language support. There are a couple of things still missing, but they are minor and not really needed to play the game. So I've been trying to make sure that at least the bigger portion of the user interface is all part of this language resource files. And contributors have been working with me on this, so you will now have a drop-down that allows you to change language. And there's an override one, which will allow you to type in your own language code, and you can create your own local files that will be loaded based on this setting. So for example, if I now click Spanish, and I will need to reload the game for the effects to properly take change. So let me actually go in and select Chinese instead, and then I'll quickly load Mercury. And the Art of Space Nerd has also supplied a couple more loading screens for us. So you can see this beautiful art randomly being showed on loading. In this case, you see the Agena docked
Player
with
I, have a
Mercury.
good flight. Reach out if there is anything you need.
Okay, so as you can see, the user interface is now in Chinese, and I'm gonna go ahead and go back to the main menu, and you can see that it's all been translated. And these are all available in different language files, and I'll quickly go through what each and every one of these means. But for now, I'm just going to go back and change the language to English, You also have Spanish and placeholder for other languages as well, like Russian and French, German. All of these can be added into this list dynamically. So if you want to contribute with a language, I will quickly show you how that is done. I think that if I can actually remember. Here we go. So translate game UI. So this is the tool that you need to do, and I'm going to go back to main menu to refresh the language. So in the bottom here, you will have something called contribute. And contribute allows you to go in and change all of the content that is being used in Reentry. So one of the things that we want to prioritize is to get the user interface all translated into different languages, and then followed by the different missions such as the academy and the campaign. So to contribute helping with the translate game UI, there is a built-in tool. I've been working quite a lot on improving this tool based on feedback, but most are loading the files in Visual Studio Code or Notepad or something like that, and just doing the translation manually, which in many cases can be easier. There's a question mark or download repo. If you click this, the language page will pop up in a browser that will take you to the GitHub repo. And all of the language files are located in this repo. So there's a download button there, which will package everything up as a zip file, and you can start looking at the content. And you can copy the content into the language directory in the app data folder for Reentry to load up the files using that override feature I mentioned. Once you have the repo down on your computer, I would suggest that you get familiar with GitHub and how that works, so you can clone a repo locally after forking a repo. But there's steps on this document, if you press download repo or the question mark, that will guide you through all of these concepts and how to set that up on your computer. And once that's done, you can load this a language file, which is the built-in language file. And then you can create a new one and start translating directly. And then, of course, when saving, your new file will appear in the repo, and you can then contribute that back to the game. And the same applies to all of the missions and things like that. But if you want to translate, reach out, and we can discuss all of the steps involved, and we will help you get started on this in Discord. So just join us in Discord. Let us know that you're interested in translating the game into any language, and then we'll get you started. Another feature that I've been working on in this update is the improvement of the Mercury Academy. So the Mercury Academy is the starting point for 95% of all players in Reentry, and they typically go through the Mercury Academy, does the exam, and receive a certificate and a badge if you're on Discord as a proof that you've done the exam. So one of the things that the Academy was missing before was all of the game mechanic elements. So 0.9 is all about infrastructure of the game and the game mechanics of the game and improving those things. And this tutorial will now walk you through all of the different mechanics in detail. So no longer is the checklists and how the checklists work and how the checklist guidance system and all those things left out. It's all covered in the tutorial. And another thing that is being done is that the tutorial will hold your hand a little bit better. Typically, if you've done the Academy before, the Academy starts talking about an instrument and saying that, okay, look at this instrument, it should be at 5.5. And then you will need to, if you're unfamiliar with the layout of the cockpit and you're just jumping in and haven't studied manual, for example, you will start to search around for those instruments. And what the tutorial now is doing is that it will highlight these things much better, and the on-screen indicator will guide you towards that highlighted component, whatever it is, and if you're not looking at it. So for example, I'm just going to double check that I have my text-to-speech enabled. And if I then go into Academy and let's just do lesson 2, for example, launch and ascent, I'm gonna jump into the cockpit. And depending on the mission that's being loaded, the text-to-speech might even start talking as you're preparing the cockpit state. But that's all right, in my opinion. But let me know if you don't like it.
Welcome back, Player I. In this lesson we will go through all the steps required to launch, the procedures needed during the ascent, and what to monitor as the rocket lifts off.
As you can see, the text-to-speech system is now reading out a message that is being displayed. And if I hit Roger now...
The ascent is an automated process, but emergencies can happen, so your task is to monitor all of the gauges periodically while being prepared for an abort.
It will read out the next message and keep on doing that.
The capsule is now in the normal state when you ingress the capsule. First, ensure transmit is set to UHF. If you feel like you need more time before ignition, you can request a... During ascent, depending on the launch vehicle, you will go through different stages to reach the velocity required for a mission. Arm the auto retro jettison squib 2, you never know when you will need it due to an emergency. Now we are ready for the launch itself. Resume countdown if you used this feature, then set the launch control switch to ready so ground knows they can trigger the ignition. If this switch is ready, the rocket will launch when the countdown reaches 0.
As you can see, the text-to-speech system will read out every message, and if I hit enter in the middle of one, it will proceed to the next one, and that should cancel the previously talking voice.
You can use timescale to reduce waiting time. If you have done everything as told, the time from launch timer is located below the analog clock on the timing panel.
This, for example, has never been highlighted before, and I've seen in multiple videos on YouTube and streams where people are struggling to actually find the time from launch. It's right there, but with a cockpit that looks like this, and you're not very familiar with it, finding that one will usually be hard, and then you'll end up, going on this trip to press everything else, and then you start to mess things up. So the highlighter will hold your hand much better. I'll show you one more example before I end this demo.
Once you are gaining altitude, immediately monitor the time from launch clock and check that it has started counting. When you see it is counting, report this to ground by using the radio menu, press C, then press clock started.
So I just timescaled a little bit closer to ignition.
Umbilical disconnect. Great. Great. For the rest of the ascent, your primary objective is to monitor the systems to ensure critical ascent indications look good and that the spacecraft is healthy. Use the window to ensure visually that you are heading upwards or along the horizon. Cycle through the various gauges quickly and often. I know there are a lot of instruments, but these are vital for a safe ascent. Let me cover the most important ones. The capsule has 2 fuel tanks. One for the autopilot, and another for manual control. The fuel quantity indicator should stay at 100% for both auto, left, and manual, right.
As you can see, the control fuel is now highlighted, and if I'm not looking at this and I'm trying to see, okay, where's the fuel, you can see that the on-screen indicator will then take you towards that control. And if I move to the next command now, for example,
above the fuel gauge you will find the accelerometer. G-forces will build up when accelerating. This will usually climb up to 5 or 6 in an orbital ascent, less in a suborbital ascent like today.
You can see that it moved from the control fuel up to accelerometer. And basically, this is most of the updates, and there's quite a lot of other things that will be highlighted as you move along with this lesson. Okay, so another thing that I've been doing is to improve quite a lot on the save states. So the save states should now better be able to load up the panel states of Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. There shouldn't be many switches left that aren't loadable anymore. In addition, I've been doing quite a lot of work on fixing the save state in lunar orbit. So if you ever done like a lunar ascent and you're sitting in the lunar module and you're climbing up towards orbit, you get into orbit, you circleize it, and you need a break. Yeah? So you save the state and exit the game and then come back later because lunar ascent and rendezvous with the CSM is a very long and complicated process. So you might need some breaks. First of all, if you're saving the state, you will have noticed that when you load it, the lunar module is in a completely different place in orbit. It can be miles off from where you saved, and those miles are actually crucial when it comes to requesting a rendezvous burn. Suddenly you're in a location that you're unable to find a good burn to rendezvous because you have 3 degrees of difference in a phase angle in your orbit, which is quite a lot of distance. So what I've done now is to improve all of that, and it's now much better at saving those states, even in complicated areas such as lunar orbit. So for example, I've just made a save state here, which is me testing, and I've done the undocking from the lunar module, or undocked the lunar module from the CSM, and I translated the CSM back a couple of feet, and then I made it stationary, so they're basically face to face. And I hit save state, and the issue was that when I load this, the CSM will be in the correct place, but the lunar module will be completely gone. You can't even see it visually in external view or inside of the cockpit. But if I now load up the state, you will see that they are actually pretty close, hopefully. So
Scenario,
we'll see.
lunar module undocking.
Okay, so now I'm in the external view, and I'm just gonna change the sun position. And if I look up now, I should be able to see the lunar module once the save state is, there we go. I had some offset I'm recording, so loading the state took a little while. However, you can now see that the lunar module is right in front of me, exactly where it was when I left off. There are still going to be some attitude issues. For example, in the Mercury or in Gemini, that if you save the state and you load it, the autopilot will initially engage and take you back to its current attitude. So there's some orientation issues still that I need to solve, but at least this is a milestone and a huge step in the right direction when it comes to save states. Another thing that I've covered is the addition of file-based save state system. So if you're saving your game progress, basically, so when you're completing a campaign and missions and doing things, the save has typically just been merged with the Windows. And if you bought a new computer, if you have a different laptop, it has been impossible to actually move this progress into the new computer. So what I've done now is to move everything out from this old system into a file-based system. And this file is something that you can use to copy and take backup of your current game progress and setup. And this also enables me to use the Steam Cloud integration. So now this file is synced through Steam Cloud and allows you to use the Steam Cloud integration and Steam Cloud Play features, hopefully if it gets approved, because when you play a Steam Play feature, you will host the game on a computer on Steam, and you connect a client to it, and the host PC will render everything and then just use your client as the target device. This will require the cloud storage to be enabled, because the computer that is running Reentry in the cloud will be different every time you run it. So you will need to take your own save file with you. And that's an automatic system of Steam as long as I'm using the Cloud Play. So that's all enabled in Reentry now. And this also unlocks the capability of using NVIDIA GeForce Now features and things like that as well. I've also added quite a lot of more game overs into Mercury, and I will follow soon with Gemini and Apollo. But now, the Gemini capsule and the mission won't get completed if you splash down without chutes, and you can catch a fire, get some smoke on board if things are overheated for over long periods of time. Things like that has now been re-added back into the game. In addition, I've been adding quite a lot of other minor things that I won't cover in detail. You can see the release notes about that. You always have access to the update notes from the main menu that will go through some of this thing. But I can mention post game. If you press 0, it will now actually pause the game, and post will be displayed on the UI. And then lastly, I want to also mention that when it comes to mission control, I've received quite a lot of complaints about the special effects that is being applied to the astronaut or the mission controllers if you're on the other side of the radio. There's some effects being added, which has a filter, and you can now turn off that filter. The filter is pretty cool, and it does add some immersion, but if there's someone with a mic setting or a bad mic, or maybe speaks a different language, then it could be a little bit harder to understand if this filter is on. So now you can go into audio, and then under the astronaut com, you can set the filter to off or on. So that's up to you to choose. So yeah, with that, thank you for watching. This was the 0.9 feature overview. What I want to cover next is to just spend 1 minute on what I'm thinking ahead. So now that Reentry is in 0.9, I want to focus more on these things that you've seen. So in the upcoming updates before the 1.0 release is going to mostly be infrastructure and the game mechanics related. There are bugs that I will need to fix in Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo as well. And there's some game overs and some achievements that I want to add to those as well. So that's something that we want to see in 0.9. In addition, I want to continue working on languages. So if you want to contribute language to Reentry, reach out so we can get you started on that. And lastly, I want to start focusing on 1.0. This means that I will remove the early access flag from the game, but it still marks just the beginning. Reentry has been in development for like 7 years or something, but it's still just the beginning. Right now we're on a platform, and we have a good framework to build a space simulator on. You can see that the capabilities of running Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo on it has improved quite a lot over the years, if you've been playing Reentry for a while, but there's still a lot of things to focus on. So after 1.0, I will focus on Apollo systems, Gemini and Mercury improvements, and bug fixes, of course. But I also want to start looking at multiplayer. So we see that the Mercury Mission Control Center and the Moker for Apollo, they are all been in a technical preview or in an alpha stage. So I'm planning on starting the actual work on getting that integrated in the game. I'm also looking at the options for after 1.0, of course, all of this. the options for doing co-op in a cockpit. So there's a multiplayer mode where multiple players can be inside of the cockpit. So in Gemini, you would be 2 players controlling one spacecraft, for example. That's something I'm looking into. Same with the Apollo Stage 1B and Skylab. I want to see if I can integrate that in the game. That's also something I want to do post 1.0. I want to get back into VR development. The current VR implementation is a preliminary implementation, technical preview basically, to see if I could do VR, if it would be possible to do VR in Reentry. And then I want to take a deep dive into VR again and probably just scrap the entire implementation I've done now and then restart it once I know how I want to do it. And lastly, there's a couple of other spacecraft. I mentioned Vostok before. That's something that I also planned for post 1.0. And then also another spacecraft or 2 in that I wish to support. So I will get back to you with 1.0 and more updates on my plans for that. But currently the focus is 0.9 and bug fixes and getting some of these mechanics and languages in place, as well as achievements. So yeah, again, thanks for watching and have a good day.